Hi, how are you?
I am so happy to be talking to you, the coolest Miss Universe ever.
Oh my God, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be talking to you. What a cool background you have there.
Oh, thank you.
Is that a
Yes.
painting?
It's a painting by Mickaleen Thomas,
Oh wow, fantastic.
an amazing artist whom I've worked with. And
It's
this
absolutely
painting is like my
beautiful.
totem. It protects me.
I love that. It looks amazing. I'm so happy to finally see you and talk to you. We talked over the phone and I have been stalking you a lot. When you go
Mutual.
online, I have, when you go online and you read an article by someone and then you just kind of end up going through everything that they've worked on. I think I've looked at your work for the past 3 years now and I'm obsessed. So thank you so much for joining this live today.
Thank you so much for having me. When you were crowned Miss Universe, I felt like the universe got something right.
Oh,
so thank God.
You.
Thank you so much for your advocacy.
I appreciate you so much.
You envision through leadership.
Thank you. I want to introduce you, but I feel like you would do it much better yourself than I would. So the listeners are probably sitting here wondering who this beautiful lady is. Do you mind introducing yourself to?
Sure. I'm Tanya Selvaratnam. I was born in Sri Lanka, raised in Long Beach, California, and I'm here in the epicenter of the pandemic in New York City, along with you. And I am, my profession is an artist, a writer, and a producer. I've worked with Glamour Women of the Year, Planned Parenthood, the Vision and Justice Project, and Aubin Pictures.
And all those amazing things. We're so honored to have you here today. Thank you so much. You mentioned that we are, in the middle of a pandemic, and I know that you have so much wisdom to drop. You have so much things that we have to learn from you today. So I don't want to waste any more time. I just want to jump, straight into it. I read your article recently about, gender-based violence in the time of, the corona pandemic that's happening, which people can turn to. And it was quite interesting when that happened, because I was like, it's not something that people thought about, when we were told to go social distancing. We kind of forgot that, there's other things in play. The pandemic has affected so many things, so many people, including women and children. Can you tell us how the pandemic has affected women and children?
Well, in any time of crisis, national emergencies, often the rights and safety of women and children are not centered when governments are coming up with policies. And while we need to be more alert to our friends and loved ones whose health is being impacted and whose livelihoods are being impacted by the pandemic, we also need to be alert to the women and children for whom the most dangerous place is their home.
Yeah,
so think about all the women and children who are already in abusive relationships and now they're quarantined with their abuser. And I feel like in many countries we're in the early stages of this lockdown, and we have an opportunity now to get ahead of it, because we have seen already in countries where they have been going on for a long time massive increases in domestic violence, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, you say we need to get ahead of it. How do you think we can go about doing that?
There are very tangible ways, and then there are more kind of community ways. So the tangible governmental ways is when they issue guidelines about social distancing and washing our hands and not touching our face. They can also be issuing guidelines about what to do if you're in an abusive relationship in quarantine.
Absolutely.
And there are some very basic things that can be done, like providing information about hotlines, how to keep yourself safe, staying away from areas where there are sharp objects that can be used against you. And also for people who are friends of people in abusive relationships, to reach out to them, to maybe be their lifeline if they need it. And so I think this is a time when we all need to come together and recognize our shared humanity, and also to recognize that there are some people who are more vulnerable we're all vulnerable, but there are some who are more vulnerable right now.
Than others. I love that you said that, because I was actually reading an article that said numbers. I think it was yours and some other article, and I was on YouTube as well earlier. And they said that the numbers of people calling hotlines have decreased, not because domestic violence has decreased, but because people cannot reach to their phones. People are scared of calling the hotlines while they are sitting next to their perpetrators. And so it's so important that you say people should now pitch up for each other more than ever. We all have friends, we all have family, and I think if you are that person's lifeline, it would be absolutely, fantastic to be able to call these hotlines on their behalf. Something else is, we know gender-based violence is happening all over the world all year round, but it kind of looks different now within the COVID space, because one of the other things I read as well was that they gave an example of how the abuse is there, but it kind of looks different now. For instance, there was a woman who was held at gunpoint when she wanted to go to work by her partner, and she continues to say that this is something that has never happened before in her relationship, but all of a sudden during these times it's happening. So there's a clear line of, it's kind of different how abuse was to how it is now. How is it different? How can we identify it now?
Well, COVID-19 is being leveraged in the same way that war is leveraged, economic instability is leveraged. This global pandemic is being leveraged to customize the intensity and the tenor of the abuse. So for instance, in the article that I wrote for the New York Times, I interviewed Katie Ray Jones from the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and she described horrific stories where women were being threatened to be thrown out of their homes to expose them to the virus, where they were being told to wash their hands repeatedly until their hands were bleeding. And then another impact is that because children are no longer able to be in their schools or daycare centers, they're more exposed to the intimate violence that was happening between their parents, and they might be more subject to abuse themselves. So I think another way that we can get ahead of this is, aside from providing more services and access to those services, also really preparing for what's going to happen after we get to the other side of this pandemic, and to be able to deal with the lifelong trauma that is sure to set in.
Yeah. There's been a lot of uprise in numbers for domestic violence, especially in countries like China and France, who have very strict, requirements when it comes to social distancing. Why do you think that it's happening more there than it is everywhere else, where the rules are a bit not as tight as maybe France and China?
Well, actually, that's changing. It is changing now as this pandemic grows. But in China, there was a more than doubling of domestic violence incidence cases. And I think part of that was because the lockdown was so rigid there that people really couldn't leave their homes. And in France, it was reported just a couple of days ago that there was a 30% uptick in domestic violence incidences there, which is heartbreaking. And so now governments are trying to scramble after the fact to deal with this other side of the pandemic, and they're instituting things like code words, or the ability, if you go to the pharmacy, that you can make a call from the pharmacy to call a domestic violence hotline. And in the US, when I first wrote the piece, there was actually a decrease in calls to the domestic violence hotline. But then just 2 days ago in Mother Jones magazine, they reported how there is actually now increases in domestic violence calls in cities like Portland, Oregon, Seattle, San Antonio, Texas, increases of 20% or more. And then we have to think about how many more calls are not being made because the abuser is right beside them. So I think we're realizing that we're all connected in terms of our health, that our personal health is tied to our collective health, is tied to our country's health and the health of our world. I think also we have to see that the safety and rights of women and children is also inextricably tied to our collective health.
So you, reading your work again, you write somewhere that there are telltales of domestic violence. Can you tell our listeners what those are so that they can, be able to maybe identify them if it's something that they're not seeing already?
Well, having been in an abusive relationship myself, and even knowing when I was in one, finding it difficult to articulate it, to speak to friends about it, and to be able to get out of it, that is really the main reason that I wanted to write it, so that it could be a resource for others. And any one of these signs on their own might not tell you the whole story of abuse. So you really have to look at it as the different stages. So the way I've broken it down is there's the fairy tale stage where you get swept up in the relationship. It is a dream come true. And then there's the stage in which you become entrapped. You're hooked. You're in it. Then you begin to be isolated, told that you shouldn't see this person, isolated from your family and friends. Then there are increasing efforts to control you, to control your movements, to control your activities. And then there's a process of being demeaned, being made to feel that you're less than, that your body's not right, that your clothes aren't right, that your hair is not right, that you can't make a move without committing a transgression. And then you begin to realize that you are in an endless cycle of abuse. And abuse takes many forms. People think of it typically as physical abuse, but it's emotional abuse, it is verbal abuse, it is financial abuse, it is digital abuse. The stories are horrific. And when you think about the statistics, like in America, that 1 in 3 women will be raped, harassed, stalked, or abused by their intimate partner. So that's by somebody that they know. What are we doing? Why aren't we doing more?
Exactly. It pains me that we even have to sit here and talk about how women should be protecting themselves, instead of maybe talking about how, young boys and men can be taught to create a safe environment for young women and girls. I mean, we were on a call earlier on and you said something, something that I've been saying as well for a while, that, abuse, it starts earlier on. It starts in the playground. It starts at home. Children absorb things that they see, things that they hear. They are shaped by society and things that are happening in society. I mean, if you have children bullying each other in the playground and you're telling the girl that it's because the boy has a crush on you, then, that's where it starts with programming them to see love as violence. And we're programming girls to also see love as violence, because there's women who really do believe that, their husbands or, their partners are showing love through, these acts of jealousy and violence and rage. And, I think it's something that we need to start looking at now, something that we need to start taking care of in our homes. For these young boys to start grooming, kinder children, so that they become the people that we want them to be in the future.
Well, absolutely. There are solutions. We just need the political, there are solutions. We just need the political will and more people like you.
And more people like you, definitely, to keep writing. You're absolutely right, because I feel like I always say the more we speak about things in our platforms, the more chances of people listening. People need to soldier forward with these issues, because only then can people be able to learn and to listen. We do have some questions that we asked people yesterday to send in questions, and I'm going to be taking some of those questions now for you to answer. So someone said, what should government be doing in this time to protect women's rights?
Well, we're seeing what they're doing not to protect women's rights. The organization in America, NARAL, N-A-R-A-L, has been doing amazing organizing around the threats to reproductive rights around the country. So there are governors and attorneys general in, for instance, Texas, that are trying to take away a woman's right to choose by shutting down abortion clinics or cutting off services, reproductive services. This is a very real threat about what's happening during this pandemic. What governments can do to protect women and also children is, as we discussed before, when issuing these guidelines about how to take care of our health and protect ourselves from the coronavirus, from COVID-19, they can also be issuing more widespread guidelines about how to protect yourself if you think you are a victim of abuse, and how people who are friends and loved ones of people in abusive relationships can support them. And providing resources like the National Domestic Violence Hotline, like the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and also there are international organizations like Equality Now that are doing amazing work around these issues.
Absolutely. This one, a very important one, I guess, that I wanted to ask as well. Where can people go? Someone asked, where can I go if I am faced with this situation right now in my house with my abuser? Where can I turn to?
The same resources that I mentioned before, the National Domestic Violence Hotline. If you aren't able to make a call yourself, find a way to send a code to a friend who can make a call on your behalf. And a lot of these websites have resources online, and they also have, you know, there are situations where abusers are monitoring people's activities online. And many of these websites have a quick exit button, which is really so important so that you can quickly like erase the fact that you were on that website. But visiting some of these resources online, I think, can really be helpful.
I have another good one. This one actually, it's something that it happens a lot. It also has happened to me before with a friend. Someone says, how do you help a friend or family member who opens up to you about being abused but doesn't want to get help? I think those happen a lot. We know those people. I know those people, you know. I know friends who've been in situations, but when I try to help, they don't really allow me, or maybe I don't know how to. So how do you go about helping someone who doesn't really seem to want to be helped?
You know, having been through my own situation, it took my opening up to a friend and her not imposing an opinion on me, but rather asking me questions, and then asking if I would be willing to talk to a friend of hers who is a domestic violence expert. And it was in talking to that domestic violence expert that I was able to see that what I was going through was classic textbook abusive relationship. And and I think it really is by sharing our stories that we break the silence, that we break the stigma. It's one of the reasons that I shared my story, so that it didn't become other people's stories too. In terms of the specific person who has a friend in an abusive relationship, but the friend does not want to get help, don't shy away from the conversation, but also be compassionate, be gentle, and be a good listener. Because sometimes it's really about asking questions, and also about providing them literature. You know, sometimes things are developed better through vehicles other than our own voices. Like if you give somebody an article, or direct them to a website, direct them to resources so that they can read it on their own time, then maybe they will see. And every person is different. There's no one size fits all for these cases. So we have to recognize that people will come to their own realizations in their own ways, and hopefully sooner than later, before it becomes dangerous.
Absolutely. And someone else, you know, I love how you said it's customized, because sometimes when you're not in a situation, you don't understand what someone is going through, and it's frustrating, and you want to help them and you become forceful. And I don't think that's, you know, a way to help someone, because this is how people end up running away from people who could possibly help them. So thank you so much for that pointer. Someone asked, why is it hard for women to leave these situations? Because I feel like that's the first advice you give someone. When someone's like, I'm being abused, people will come in and be like, why don't you leave? Why don't you leave? And so someone's asking, why is it difficult for women to leave these situations?
So I'm one of those people that friends asked, why didn't you leave immediately? These are complex questions that require very nuanced answers. And, you know, I'm a child who, when I was growing up, I witnessed horrific domestic violence in my home. And I always thought of myself as someone who would leave immediately if I were in a situation where I was being abused. But the abusers are so skilled at manipulating you that by the time you are entrapped in the relationship, it becomes harder to, or it takes longer to extricate yourself. I mean, in my case, it was a relatively short amount of time. It was, you know, over the course of about a year, but there are people who are stuck in relationships for years, decades, their entire lives. And I think one reason that it's hard for women to leave is because they're financially dependent. Another reason is because they don't have support of family or friends. I know that was the case with my mother, sadly. And in some situations, it's because the abuser is so skilled at making you think that they're going to change, that they're going to get help, that you hold on to that hope. You know, in difficult times, we hold on to any signs of hope. And often the abuser is so charming, they're charismatic, they're narcissistic. And so we get sucked in. So I hope that answers the question. There are many different reasons, and we have to be attentive to all of them.
Yeah, I mean, abusers do look like our fathers and brothers and friends. They're not some kind of monsters that come from, you know, different planets. They
don't all look like...
Sorry?
They don't all look like Harvey Weinstein.
No. Oopsie. No, they don't. They look charming. They look incredible. You know, they, like I said, they're people who are close to us and people who you would never think it is. Which, you know, sometimes raises the question of when women come out from their abuse and people say, why didn't you speak up earlier on? Why didn't you say anything when it was happening? Or people coming out to say that could never be my friend, you know, my friend could never do that. And, you know, it's those unfortunate things that keep us, you know, stagnant and not being able to move forward in protecting women, because people are protecting abusers at home. Which is quite sad. But someone said, let's look for one more question. There's so many. Ooh. I love it when people ask questions because usually they don't, so they're very interested in this topic. What is your message to those who are suffering with domestic violence during this time?
You're not alone and you're not crazy. And there's help for you. You know, in the book I have that's going to be coming out later this year, it's called Assume Nothing. I describe it as a thriller with resources to get help. And actually, I'm just going to read, I made a list of what I wish I had known, if that's okay.
That's okay, please do.
That of advice that I would wish somebody had given me. Mm-hmm. And number one is document what is happening to you. Mm-hmm. Write down every bit of pain and include dates and correlate them with supporting material like email exchanges and photographs. Mm-hmm. Number two, tell someone, ideally more than one person whom you trust, not to tell anyone else. Number three, figure out whom you can speak with who will know what to do, such as a domestic violence expert or lawyer. Number four, what I said before, know that you are not alone and you're not crazy. And number five, it is okay to feel traumatized, but please don't feel ashamed. Number six, if your partner is not willing to acknowledge the problem and get professional help, then get away. Your partner is probably not going to change. And then the last two are, don't worry about your abuser. Focus on yourself. You are the most important part of this equation. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. It is very helpful. And to let people know, we will be putting these tips on to the Miss Universe page so they can check on the stories. We're going to be uploading them in there so that people can see and be able to read and go back in there. Thank you so much for sharing those. I'm sure they are going to help a lot of people. I don't know how they feel, but I'm appreciative, you know, to be able to have had this conversation, especially during this time when people feel like they are alone, when people feel like there's no places to run to, because, you know, people use work to run away. People run away to relatives and to families, and now, you know, they are entrapped in those homes. Isolation is one of the tools that abusers use. to keep their victims at home. And now with this social distancing, it's more of a help on their side as well. So for women to know that there's ways that they can get away is such an important topic that I wanted us to speak about today, so that they know that they're not alone. There's resources that they can use, to help them out. So thank you so much for taking time today to come and to speak to us. I'm seeing comments coming in, people saying this is such an important topic, because it really is. Is there anything else that I haven't asked about that you would really like to share before we end the live?
Yes, a few quick things. I noticed there was a question that came up that said, if I was Indian. No, I'm Sri Lankan. And the other thing is that, we're all in this together. We're in it for the long haul. And my hope is that when we get to the end of this pandemic, that we have a kinder, more humane, and more creative world. I would really love, for instance, on reality television, instead of the Real Housewives franchise, I think we should have the Kind Neighbors franchise.
That would be amazing.
Wouldn't that be amazing? The other thing is that, so I have a book called Assume Nothing, and the release date is TBD. Because of the corona apocalypse, a lot of publishing dates are being moved around. So if people could sign up for my mailing list at tanyaturnsup.com, or follow me at Tanya Author on both Instagram and Twitter, that will be the best way to stay tuned. And then when the book is ready to launch into the world, I hope that it helps others not become their story too.
Of course, we will definitely share that information. Thank you.
Oh, and my sweater says resilient.
What does it say? Resilient.
It says resilient.
I love it. I love it because
it's lingua franca. Check it out. They make these custom embroidery. Lingua franca, which makes these custom embroidery sweaters. So I thought this was very appropriate for today.
It is very appropriate for today. Thank you so much. I should have worn mine, but I don't have it. So that means I have to get it. I definitely have to get mine. But yeah, thank you so much. We appreciate you for all that you do, your articles, your work, just everything that you stand for is incredible. It's things that we need in people today. And I love that you're spreading a message of kindness as well, that after we leave this, we're hoping that we will realize, how much more alike we are than different, and how we thrive when we work together.
Yes, it's like what you say, #Universe United.
Yeah, of course, Universe United. And thank you for bringing that up, actually, to remind people to keep on telling us about their stories on #Universe United. Keep us informed about what you're doing. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I admire you, and I am so grateful that you are leading us.
Oh, thank you. I admire you. You'll be getting a lot of calls from me. Like I said, I've been stalking you. So now I'm going to take it next level. So wait for those calls.
I can't wait. I have a lot of time these days. We're all making more phone calls.
Do.
I've never made more phone calls and video calls in my life. I've also never watched so much television.
But we need to be grateful for these digital times, because at least we're able to do things like this.
Yes.
That still have an impact in the world. Thank you so much, Tanya.
Thank you, Josie. Okay.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Hi guys, thank you so much for joining in on the conversation with myself and Tanya. I'm sorry I couldn't take a lot of questions from the live, but we did ask yesterday for people to submit questions that they would like for us to answer, and the questions that you submitted were incredible, and I think Tanya answered them to the best of her ability, and we hope to have many more conversations like this with a lot of influential people out there who have so much more to say, people who have a voice. Like we said, we want to use this platform, keep giving it to women so that they can continue taking up space even throughout this pandemic. Just because we're stuck at home doesn't mean we should stop doing the things that we believe in and stop doing the things that we are passionate about. So thank you so much for taking time to come and listen. I hope this was insightful for you. I hope that if you are seeking help, you were able to find at least some form of relief from this conversation. And look out for our stories. We will be putting in more information on how you can help yourself during this pandemic, or how you can help a friend. An important note, we have said that people aren't able to call the hotlines, and people aren't able to reach out because they are trapped in their homes with these abusers. So if you know of a friend who is going through that situation, or if you suspect that they are, this is a time to check up on them, to check how they are, so that you can call these numbers for them, so that you can get the help on their behalf. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey, Esto in Indonesia, thank you so much. Hello to everyone in Brazil as well. I see you. Thank you for your comments. Before I leave, please don't forget to send us your videos, to send us your stories. I'm loving the dance videos, by the way, that you guys are sending us on #UniverseUnited. Remember, we are a global community. We are there for each other. You are not alone. We're all here to support each other. So let's continue being on the #UniverseUnited platform. Thank you for joining us. And someone said, let's normalize that boys do cry. I absolutely agree. Boys do cry. They go through a lot, like we do. And emotions isn't a woman or a man thing, or girl or boy thing. Everyone goes through it, and if you want to cry, definitely you should cry. Thank you so much, guys. I hope that you will be here again when we come out for another conversation with more people who have so many voices and information to share with the world. Join us next time on the next episode of #UniverseUnited.